Thank you guys that are joining us today. We're excited you're here. We have an awesome panel lined up. I'm Julie Headley. I'm the VP of Events at the Fort Worth Chamber. And we actually had this group on a roundtable a week or two ago talking about COVID protocol and really what do you need to know? How do you know what to believe and follow? And what are some of the things that you should do if you're a business, especially a business who is dealing with customers and trying to stay as safe as you possibly can. So Mike Coffey is going to facilitate the conversation today. He is the president of Imperative Information Group. He's also the chair of the South Area Council. Is that right, Mike?
That's good enough.
I should know that working at the chamber. I should know that. And all around a good guy. So Mike, thank you for leading this discussion. Really important information we'll share today, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Are we live on Facebook? Do you know?
We're live on Facebook. We
Great.
are.
Hi, Facebook. Okay, well, first let's introduce the other panelists. Dr. Farley, why don't you tell us about your very interesting background and what you've been doing throughout this COVID stuff?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Kara Farley. I'm a medical physician, primary care. My background is in military medicine. So I've been a naval flight surgeon for the past 5 years. Just separated in July. So I was still on active duty when all of COVID began during the shutdown and everything like that. And I spent a lot of that time on our base where I was stationed doing protocols, procedures. What do we do if we have a positive COVID case? How do we screen people before they come in? And I realized that the civilian side probably needed a lot of the same help and guidance. So in getting out, I started a private practice where I do telemedicine services, and I also do medical consulting for businesses. In addition to that, we have a screening app that employees can use to screen themselves every day before they come into work. And if they screen positive, they can book a telemedicine visit with me for triage. Also, we do COVID-19 testing on site if that's something your company wanted to do. So that's what I've been doing for the past couple months. And I'm just here to kind of help you guys out, hopefully give you guys some good information. And my company is called Blue Ocean Health Services.
And Beth Stanley is my personal training coach when it comes to sales issues and a long time friend. So Beth, tell us how crazy your life has been since mid-March.
What's been interesting. So I'm the CEO and founder, and I love it that you called me your sales coach. I always think about I'm kind of your sales whipper,
Yeah.
kind of whipping you into shape. But coach, I like better. I'm CEO and founder of Trainertainment, and we are the leading training and coaching company in the family entertainment center sector. So it's an interesting question about what have you been doing since this broke out, because as you look at leisure, entertainment, hospitality, you know that that sector shut completely down, and we're struggling getting open. We're doing better here in Texas than in a lot of places across the country. But I found a really good spot in our organization. Okay. I found a really good spot in our organization and in our industry to kind of fill that need. Our people needed to get together, and we needed to talk to each other about how to get back to market and how to get open safely. And I feel almost as busy as ever, except I don't have the travel piece, which has kind of been exciting. But we've been coaching and training anybody who will take the help. We've done a whole lot of just get in the trenches and do the work, whether there's money or not. I would say just transparently, I don't know, I think we did about 20% of total revenue from prior year in Q2. And yet we're functioning, we're out there working every day and looking really forward to just putting one foot in front of the other. And I think that's what we've been able to do in our industry, is to provide that sense of encouragement to listen and to work together on the now normal. I don't think there's going to be a new normal. I'm an advocate of the now normal, and that's kind of where we've been.
Yeah, I keep, back as probably as early as April, I was optimistically, everybody was saying, oh, this will be done by early summer and all of that. And I'm like, we're doing all our business contingency planning that this is going to last till the end of the year. And now I've changed that where, and I'm a big fan of Dr. Michael Osterholm's stuff at CIDRAP. And I think this is, we're going to be in this boat next year. I think for most of the year, at least. And, my business planning is always around plan for the worst case scenario, and anything else that happens is gravy. But from the day we closed our offices and in all the other, I'm on several boards, and even our own church. I'm at University Christian Church, and I was on the committee there to decide what our reopening plan is. And I've always said, you don't want to walk it backwards if you can. Now, let's not take 2 steps forward, 1 step back and do that. Let's be steady and keep people's faith in us that we're acting in their best interest, not just to get customers in the door or people in the church or whatever else it is. And I think that's a lot of the frustration that people are feeling is because we ran out and reopened restaurants at 75% or whatever, and we reopened bars, and then it turned out maybe not to be such a great idea, and so we backed it up, and I think that just generates a lot of stuff. But Kara, Beth is a road warrior. I mean, she's on the road, or back in the good old days, she was on the road all the time. What are you telling folks about travel now? How do you advise what kind of travel, what modes of transportation they should consider, things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Mike. So for every person, you have to make an individual decision about why you're traveling and that specific reason, and if it's worth the risk. So I think the biggest thing to remember with, travel, airplane, car, anything like that, is that, and I say this all the time, every time you leave your house, whether it's to go to the grocery store or get on an airplane, you are assuming some sort of risk of being exposed to COVID. Masks are going to decrease our risk, but it doesn't eliminate our risk. In fact, if you look at the study that came out this past week about the different types of masks and how they prevent the droplet spread, it's decreasing it. The N95 is the only one that's going to completely stop it. So you have to personally accept that risk and decide why you're traveling and what sort of risk you're willing to take for that travel. And obviously airplanes are going to be higher risk than driving. Driving, you're alone in your car with your family that you're going with versus on an airplane, you're in a small contained space. But that's not to say that you shouldn't fly on an airplane. You have to think about your own personal health risk as well. Are you considered in that high risk category? I think that's very important to think about. So it's really an individual decision for people. And I've had many patients ask me, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, if you want to go visit your daughter, and that's really important to you because exactly like Mike said, we're going to be dealing with this for the foreseeable future. I would think at least 2 years, we're going to be in some sort of COVID era. So are you going to not see your daughter, or are you not going to go visit your grandkids for 2 years? And if that's the decision that you need to make because you're high risk, then you individually make that decision. But I think that's a good way to put it in perspective on travel plans.
Beth, a lot of your clients were shut down 100%, and as were a lot of mine, obviously. But your folks, family entertainment centers, we're talking about bowling alleys and jump houses and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
What are they doing now? Are you around the country? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so it's all over the place. Tomorrow there's going to be a terrific, I've been banging the drums that they need to take what we call in-school bowling carpets. They send them to the military too, Dr. Farley. Their in-school bowling carpets are their carpets, and you have pins that you set up and you can bowl outdoors or at school, and we send them to the military. And I kept banging my fists that y'all need to take them to the steps of the Capitol and get the governors to come and bowl, because in New York, in Washington, in Michigan, they're still not open. And, it's crazy that they'll open casinos, but they won't let people play video arcade games. And so it's confusing. And so in Michigan tomorrow, they're going to the state capitol. I don't know if they're taking the in-school bowling carpets, but all of the BPAA folks are headed to the state capitol of Michigan. So we're really excited about maybe getting some visibility there and helping them get open. They've taken all kinds of wonderful precautions. They're ready. They're ready and they're able to open. I have people in Louisiana that they can do 50% capacity. And so they're bowling on every other lane. And so your group can physically distance from the next group. So they know how to do this, and they've been so mindful and so cautious and careful about making it work. They've spent thousands and thousands of dollars prepping and getting ready, and by the tens or more, they're dropping like flies. We've got people who have legacy businesses where their property is worth more than the business. And under these circumstances, we have a favorite customer who's been in our business coaching program since 2014, and we're just heartbroken. But she's 70, and she can literally sell her property and make 10 times her profit this year that she would make over the next 10 years. It would take her 10 years and all the strife of running the business. So it makes sense, but we're going to have a bunch of compression. I had originally thought, Mike, that maybe we would lose, I don't know, 25 or 30% of the people in the family entertainment sector. And I'm so concerned that it might be as much as 40 or 50%, because they can't last. They can't make it till January. Washington moved all their indoor entertainment got moved to phase 4. And there's no clarification about when phase 4 may pop. So we don't.
Yeah, well, and that's depending on whose plan you're looking at. We're still in phase 1 in a lot of places, and it's our numbers the last few weeks in Texas have been going down some. But well, that's a good question, Dr. Farley. What numbers do you rely on? Because we see infection, positive testing rate, but that seems like that's a skewed number, because the number of people who only people who think they may be infected are getting tested right now anyway. So is it hospitalizations? Is it death? What numbers do you think are useful for people to watch?
Leading indicator. Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're looking at the number for. Are we talking about when should schools safely reopen? If we're looking at that and we're looking at numbers, we really want the R to be under 1. So, for every one person, I'm not infecting more than one other person, to just try and basically, from the very beginning, flatten the curve is really the thing to look at. So it depends on what you're looking at it for. I think a big indicator and it depends on the certain area, is the hospital beds, right? Because there's no way to stop COVID, right? It's going to continue to spread. More people are going to continue to be exposed, but we want that to occur slowly over time. So that's our goal for everything, because we don't have enough hospital beds in a certain area to handle the number of people who would need that higher level of care. There aren't enough doctors, there aren't enough beds. So that's the number one thing to focus on when we're looking at those numbers. And I think Mike brought up a good case here, outside of who's being hospitalized, and looking at, okay, in Tarrant County, in Dallas County, how many beds do we have? How full are they? And then looking at that R value, so that reproductive value, like how quickly is it spreading? The numbers are very skewed. The data now is showing that up to 40% of cases are probably asymptomatic. So we really don't know, where the infection level is at. So I think the best thing to look at are the hospital beds, and that will tell us from our area, okay, how are we doing? Can we manage to keep these people in the hospital and treat them appropriately so they can get the care that they need, and for those high risk people.
I'm going to put you on the hot spot, Dr. Farley.
Yeah.
As a physician who, and when I put you on the hot spot, I'll call you Dr. Farley. When it's an easy softball, I'll call you Kara. But when it's a hard one,
I love that.
but and let me also say, if you have into the audience, if you have questions and you're on the Zoom call, please drop them in the question and answer thing, and we'll pay attention to those. And hopefully Julie at the chamber is watching the Facebook page, and we'll pipe in with any of those. But okay, so a hard question, Dr. Farley, or controversial, I guess. I still see on the arbiter of all wisdom, Facebook, I still see a lot of people posting stuff like, this is a hoax, or we're overreacting, it's overblown. People are recovering from, almost everybody recovers from it. The relative number of deaths is relatively small, and all of that. I spend Saturday mornings with my 91-year-old grandparents, so I'm pretty cautious. But I'd be curious what your take. I mean, do you think there's places where we're overreacting? But are there, what's your take on all the criticism of the depth of our response?
Yeah, that is a great question, Mike.
Pull the pen and just throw it over at you.
Yeah, I mean, so as a physician, and much like what antibiotics should I use to treat X condition, if you ask 10 different physicians, you'll probably get 10 different answers. So keep that in mind. But from myself and my experience as a physician, I think that the world has, in the media, social media, and media itself has created a lot of fear with COVID. I believe that it is definitely can be a severe illness for those people who are at high risk. So if you are elderly, if you have a compromised immune system, if you're obese, if you smoke, if you have COPD, those people, especially if you have more than one comorbidity, okay, you are at high risk for having severe complications and being hospitalized and being on a vent. And when we look at America in general, and the percentage of people that are going to fit into that category, it's large. So those were the numbers that people were looking at and saying, okay, if this many people in America, so 30% of America is obese, and then we look at those people, okay, do we have a secondary factor on top of that? Then they're considered extremely high risk for needing to be on a ventilator. And that in and of itself, that amount of people, if all those people got COVID and had severe illness, that would overwhelm our hospital system. And that's the scary part, right? Is that we're in America, in our great country, where people would not have access to care and they would pass away because of that. Not because we can't treat the disease, but because there aren't enough doctors, there aren't enough beds, there aren't enough ventilators. So when you think about it from that perspective, yeah, it's really scary. And we need to try and do our best to keep the curve flat and slow the spread. Now, the other side of me, when I think about this, says schools closing and the effects that has on my children, on generations of children to come, and the detriment that we cause by doing that. That is also very scary. It's a huge unknown. We don't know what we're going to do because of this. These kids that don't have places to go, whose parents have to go to work, who don't have food to eat, who now are being at higher risk of child abuse, all of the things that we're seeing. And then just the fall behind in education. They've already been out for 5 months now. I mean, if we're including summer. And I mean, of course, we have the online learning, but let's be realistic. Unless you're a high school student or college, it is not comparable to what these kids get in a teaching scenario. But, you've got teachers who are scared. I think there's just a lot of fear. If I could have my way with the world, what would I say that we should do? I would say everybody needs to be doing some form of screening every day before they go somewhere. If they're symptomatic or if they've been exposed, they need to stay at home for that mandatory period. And then we need to figure out a way as a community to get our kids back in school. Cohorts, whatever we have to do. That's more important than, being able to have our businesses up and running in full capacity. Schools need to be our priority for the community because, that's our future generation, and they have to have access to education and access to a safe place where they can go during the day. So I think that is the thing that I am the most concerned about in our reaction to COVID is the closure of schools and then the inability to reopen them now that they're closed, and the fear that's associated with that, reopening. So that's my biggest concern. Did we overreact? I think only time will tell, right? I agree. I think the mortality rate overall, we see it, it's very low, and the common cold when it first started, which is a type of coronavirus, right, probably had a very similar effect on the population. Certain people probably got very sick. Majority of people had no or had very mild illness. And then you had this large amount of people who were probably infected but had no symptoms at all. And the most recent information that's coming out about that is very interesting, that these asymptomatic people, their cells, the receptors that the virus actually attaches to, the virus can't really attach. So they don't show symptoms, and they also probably don't mount an immune response, and so therefore won't have antibodies. So it's all very, very interesting stuff that now that we've had some time to study the virus, seeing more things. But I know I kind of got sidetracked, but hopefully that was a decent answer to your question. Very loaded question, Mike, but I appreciate it because you have to ask the hard questions,
Well, a lot of parents are doing the calculus right now. Here in a few weeks, do we send our kids back to in-person school, or do we keep them home and let them, try the online stuff? If you're a parent of a school-age child, what would the age of the child make a difference to you? What things would you want to see the school doing before you were comfortable sending your kid?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is 100% a way to get kids back to school safely. Are we going to be able to mitigate all risk? No, absolutely not. But, we can't mitigate all risk from the grocery store either, or from going to restaurants, and people are doing that, and school is much more important. And in a long-term view, obviously we have to eat. That's important too, right? But
Gotta get our margaritas too. So yeah,
very important. But so there's absolutely a way to get kids safely back to school. Do I have all the answers? No. But cohorts I think are a huge thing. So if I was looking at sending my kids to school, I would want to know that they were going to be in a small group and only in that small group, right? So they're not going to be exposed to a large amount of people. So maybe a class of, 14, 15 kids, and they have one teacher or two teachers that rotate through. Also for the teachers, I would hope that they're wearing face masks as well as face shields. Now for the students, it's unrealistic to say that you can have a kindergartner who's going to keep a mask on all day. So I think too, that's something to think about as well. If you are a parent, is the age of my child, right? And then also your individual child. Does your child have a condition that puts them at higher risk? If I had one of my children who would be at high risk for severe complications, you better believe that I'd be keeping all of my kids home. And that's individual decisions, again, very similar to travel. But I think the schools have to be available to be able to do these things and make the protocols and procedures in place so that they can make it as safe as possible, so that the kids that need to come to school, that have to have that face-to-face learning to be able to succeed, that maybe don't have a safe home environment to be at in school, is their way to be out of that, or their way to get food. Those kids need to be able to have that environment to go to. And that's what our tax dollars go to, is supporting those schools so we can support those kids.
And as a parent, I need these ankle biters out of my house. I mean, and it's just the reality is, my own sanity is on edge. But Beth, your customers are almost all public facing businesses. Yes. Where they're dealing with the public on a daily basis. What kind of precautions do you see them taking as they reopen to the public?
So they definitely ramped up. It's so funny because cleaning and sanitization and disinfecting, like, it's always been part of the protocol, but just making that a little more visible, in some cases a lot more visible. People have put up partitions, similar to what you've seen at the grocery stores and things like that. Many of them already had contactless pay systems. Those that didn't are engaging in those sorts of things. Almost everyone that I know of is making sure that employees wear masks. Almost everyone is doing employee temperature checks in the beginning. And this is so funny because it's such a short amount of time, but for whatever reason, it feels like it's just forever. But in June, as people begin to get open, there was a lot of employees wore masks, but it was not a mandatory thing for guests. And that it's so interesting because we had a really good incline, and lots of people were seeing 60, 70, 80, even 100% of total revenue all the way up to July. And then we had the fallout, I guess, from Memorial Day and probably protests and, you know, all that stuff. And so then we get the summer spike. And so now mandatory masks go in almost everywhere, or businesses said, hey, we're going to go ahead and get ahead of this and we're going to do mandatory masks. So exactly then what you see is kind of a decline after the 4th of July. And it's taken that little dip for 2 or 3 weeks, and now things seem to be a little bit better all of a sudden again. And so it's really, I would assume we're going to see that. And it may, if I was a real statistician, I might could lay graphs and maps of performance next to cases and deaths and all of that. It might all match up almost the same, you know. So
yeah, you mentioned the sanitization being really visible, and and I think that's for customers to feel comfortable about it, and to reinforce to employees how seriously we take it. I travel not as much as you, Beth, but 2 or 3 times a month easily, and I haven't since late February or March, but I had to do 2 business trips to Austin last month, and I stayed at a hotel downtown Austin, which, by the way, you can get for really good deals right now.
Oh yeah.
And but they've got, every door is taped like a crime scene. So when you open the door and break the seal, you know you're the first person in there since it was cleaned. And they've got notes about, hey, we cleaned this, little cards and things all over pointing out the things that they've done. And I think that, just to give retail customers or even customers who are coming into your businesses a higher sense of confidence.
Yeah.
I feel better. I do yoga every morning at 6 a.m. and they do my temperature as I'm walking in. And that just gives me a little, and we have to wear masks. And I do yoga in a room that's about 100 degrees and about 60% humidity or something. And I wear a mask, but through the class, but at least I know that they're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And so
we've had a ton of conversation, Mike, in the group, in the Peer Talk group, about consumer confidence. And until, and Dr. Farley, I really appreciated so much about what you're saying as far as people taking, looking at their own individual circumstances and trying to make the best decisions that they can make for their family. And I think that's, they talked about the theater of cleaning. That was some of the language that got used in the early part of what we're doing, but it can't just be theater, because we noticed some of that. Candy had taken her children and gone to a junk place or something, and she said that it was just theater. Somebody was wiping stuff down, but they weren't wiping down the things that people were touching. She was just kind of at the busyness of looking busy. And so I think that training is so important. One of the things that seems extremely important as we face day to day is, how do you deal with conflict? Because there's a lot of, as much as we're trying to build consumer confidence, there's a lot of disagreement about what people think should be. And so they bring that, just like they do in normal. I mean, some of this is just normal. The public can be complicated to deal with. And so, you take 17 and 18-year-olds who work the front lines, and they don't have as much experience with dealing with the public. somebody's got to teach them and train them and load their lips and you know, give them the best things to say, even if you don't agree with somebody, because we're not very good at
and
that.
how do you do that? How do you train you know, at a restaurant or just retail or family entertainment center? You've got a 17, 18-year-old kid sitting at the front door. Somebody comes in and says, oh, that's, you know, those masks are, you know, masks are killing me. I can't breathe. And why would I want to have that extra? Why would I want to breathe my own CO2? And all those things that people say. How do you train a 17-year-old kid to respond to that, Beth?
Well, one of the first things that we did, because I think one of the most important things to do is to role play and to load people's lips and to give them the actual words to use. And so we created like just a short video that showed several different scenarios. Somebody who was compliant, somebody who was, you know, contradictory, somebody who acted like a jerk. And because that's the thing, they don't have any practice. And so you don't want to be in practice mode when you're in the game, which is what happens in the retail environment. And you can't practice or know every situation that's going to come up. But I think that to load their lips, to really talk about why, that's very important. You want to talk about why this is the way we're going to do it at ABC plays, right? This is why we believe we're going to do what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Now let's practice, because they don't need the first time that it happens to be with the customer. They need to practice with you. And these are these are kind of standard things we should be doing all the time. I personally have the belief that we do a better job with 10-year-olds playing baseball than we do training frontline employees. You know, we could take a lesson from the military, Dr. Farley. We spend far more time practicing with 10-year-olds, learning the game, practicing hitting, and then they just go play a game here and there. We literally do not do that on the front line. And I shouldn't say we. There are some real, you know, Starbucks has a great training program. There are some great models out there that have great training programs. But by and large, the entrepreneurs that I've had experience with in my life, and of course, each of us as consumers can see sometimes who's had really good training or not. Chick-fil-A, we know they do a great job. There's consistency. You get what you get, and you get it consistently there. But a lot of places we don't. Would you all agree? As a consumer?
Yeah, and a lot of and I think that's a lot of the problems.
Somebody has a great question.
You got those kids.
I'm sorry.
So how would you tell? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Somebody had a great question for Dr. Farley.
That came in
Okay.
from someone watching for Dr. Farley. What's your take on college football playing or not playing in terms of risk, I'm assuming, and that one's from Laura.
Yeah, Laura, great question. And I think it can be applied to all sports, right? So I think, sorry?
Or theater.
Yeah.
Mike and I both have superstar theater people that.
Yeah, theater, choir, band, sports, anything where these kids are together. And I think on one hand, you have to think, okay, some people just consider, oh, it's football or it's theater. It's an extracurricular activity. It really doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But for these kids, I mean, this could be, their way to get a college scholarship, their way to an education. It could be, the thing that really helps their mental health. You don't know these kids' situations and what this does for them. So I think that is huge, and you have to consider that. And that's the same thing that when we talk about schools, the school it's more than just the education. It's more than just the football. For a lot of these kids, their coach or their choir instructor, their band instructor, that's their role model. Yeah. And if we're taking that away from these kids, what are we going to do to our child, or that generation? What sort of mental health issues are we going to see because of that? So I think that's something huge to consider. You have to balance the risk, right? That's everything in medicine, is balancing the risk. When I talk to somebody about starting a medication for high blood pressure, okay, they always ask me, what are the side effects of the medication, Dr. Farley? You know, am I like gonna grow another pinky, or is it gonna make me get dementia when I'm, you know, in my 70s because I took this medicine? And I'm like, okay, that's not the way we should look at it. The way we should look at it is, you have high blood pressure, and what is the high blood pressure gonna do to you if we go untreated, right? We know what it's gonna do. Now we weigh that with the risk of taking the medication, okay? And we want the risk of having hypertension to be higher than the risk of taking that medication. And that's why we use the medicine. So I think we have to consider that same idea in this scenario with the sports, with the schools, with the extracurricular activities. You know, the risk of COVID and these kids getting COVID, because it is a risk and it's going to be there. I can't tell you, oh, if we put in all these procedures in place, no college kid playing football is going to get COVID. That's absolutely not true. They're probably all going to get it. You know, but what's the risk of them getting COVID and having severe complications in that age group, in a group where they're, you know, in very good shape, highly unlikely that they have these medical conditions that are putting them at higher risk, you know, compared to what if we don't have college football? You know, I think about my husband, who was a collegiate athlete who got a full ride scholarship. If it wasn't for that, I don't know if he would have ended up in college, you know, and I think that was huge for him. So that's really something that these schools need to be considered. Now, do we need fans? Okay, we can probably watch it on TV. Now, the schools may disagree with that, because I think a large part of their revenue would come in when we're talking about football. But I think we could easily record it, and, you know, or we could spread it out to where, okay, we're talking about 25% of the stadium's full. We've got people in their individual groups, they're wearing masks. Then is it much different from going to the grocery store? Then probably not. You know, when you're passing somebody that you don't know at the grocery store. So I think that there is a way to make it work. And I think we have to consider the importance beyond just it being an extracurricular activity for these kids. You know, like my husband, I was also a collegiate athlete. I mean, it was huge for me, you know, what it did for my ability to get into medical school, you know, and just the experience it gave me in college. So that's something that's very important to consider. And again, this population is low risk, you know, so it's just something to think about.
And when we say a population's low, we hope they're still practicing common sense about trying to avoid it and trying to spread it. My biggest concern I live across the street from TCU Stadium. And kids are coming, you know, move-in day was yesterday at TCU, and I went to Kroger, and it was all the kids were back, and I hadn't seen them since March, and it was kind of nice. But then I thought, yeah, they're all hugging and doing stuff and doing college kid stuff, and that's a great way to spread germs. And then across the street we got there was a house party last night, and we're watching TV, watching out the front window, and here comes two kids, here comes two more. The house is full across the street and just takes one of those kids, and we've got that spread, and then they move into and so I hope, and I'm sure TCU is, and I hope all the schools are really pushing to kids, and parents are pushing the kids, because I've got a son at UT. Hey, you know, just because this doesn't hurt you doesn't mean that it can't cause a lot of other damage, and it could hurt you. I mean, you know, you don't want to get this. You don't want to lose a sense of taste for 2 or 3 weeks, and you don't want lung problems and all of that. So you mentioned some of the PPE stuff, and you mentioned face shields versus face masks. Mm-hmm. Would you talk about the efficacy of those two things, and how they're different for, like, you know, if we're going to dine in a restaurant?
Yeah, absolutely. So face shield is not going to be good as a face mask. Okay, if we're just talking about one or the other, which one should I use? A face mask is going to be better, right? Because COVID is spread through droplet contact. Okay, that's the end of the story. There's no airborne, none of this stuff. And in fact, when we talk about businesses and schools and where they need to put their focus on procedures and protocols, 80% of it needs to be on preventing droplet spread. 20% can be on cleaning, but vast majority of it needs to be on droplet spread, because the chance of you getting it from an inanimate object that I touched, you know, 12 hours ago is just slim to none. So, so when we're talking about masks, face masks are going to be better. Now, if you combine, so that's what I was talking about for teachers, combining or even a child or a person who's at higher risk, anyone who's at higher risk, if you have a face shield and a face mask on, okay, and then the other person that you're with just has a face mask on, if that person has COVID, the chance of you getting it is significantly lower now because of both of those things that you have on. So, we talk about masking, like everybody wearing a mask is going to help protect everyone, so you wearing a mask protects yourself a little bit, but more so it protects other people. And that's why the theory of universal masking came into play, was that if everybody's wearing a mask, then we significantly decrease the risk of transmission. And also talk a little bit about, without getting too much into the science piece of it, the inoculum. Okay. So if we are wearing a mask, let's say I have COVID and I have my mask on and I go out to dinner with Beth and I cough, and less virus gets out, right? Because it's just a cloth mask. It's not an N95, but less virus gets out. Okay, so Beth has been exposed to the COVID virus from me, but it's not as big of a dose if I didn't have a mask on at all. Okay, so the dose of the virus that she has come into contact with is now lower. So therefore, Beth has a lower virus load and has less symptoms. So although, masking may not be perfect in stopping the spread, it could decrease the amount of virus that people are exposed to, which in turn are going to cause a less severe infection, which would be great, right? If Beth got COVID, but didn't really get that sick, maybe she had fatigue for a few days and a headache, and then she got better, versus if I didn't have a mask on at all and I gave her my full viral load, and then she ended up getting really sick because her body was exposed to more virus and her body couldn't mount an immune system quick enough to handle that higher level of viral load. So that's something to consider as well with the masking. And I know that there is a lot of politics behind the masks, right? And there's a big political divide here. And I get it, the feeling of, hey, you're telling me to wear a mask. We don't even really know if it works, but this is the best evidence that we have right now. So if we can protect our fellow Americans by doing something as simple as wearing a cloth mask, then let's do it,
Yeah.
when we're in public. We're not asking people to wear it in their house and that kind of thing.
It's a small thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm always shocked to see somebody with their mask on by themselves in their car. I'm like,
I am too. I am too, Beth. I crack up when I
but maybe
see
they were just trying not to forget it. Maybe they were just trying not to forget it. I'm so excited because I did get logoed masks. So I'm pretty excited.
That's a great reason to wear a mask.
I thought they were going to put
You have the logo on your face. People cannot miss it.
Put it right there in the middle.
When
There you
I put on a
go.
mask, I'm 50% more attractive. 'Cause
There
it's
you
covering half
go.
my face.
Yeah.
It hides my fat cheeks. And
It's all in the eyes. It's all in the eyes. Well, we have just a couple minutes left. So do we want to maybe get a couple final thoughts and from you guys on safety and doing the best thing possible for a business?
Sure.
Beth, why don't you jump in?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I think the thing that I would just try to be encouraging about is to know that more than one thing can be true at the same time, and that we've really got to be responsible and to really think critically. Mike and I have a dear mentor friend, and Nancy used to always say, "Well, what else could be true?" So in this particular time, as things can really nag at you, and maybe you've watched too much news, or God forbid you keep scrolling your Facebook and seeing what all your high school non-medical buddies are saying. I don't know why we believe those people. I appreciated your meme the other day, Mike. And that anytime things seem too crazy, be it with your business, with your family, with your neighbors, with your friends, maybe just pause, just breathe and think, okay, what else could be so? And know that you need to think more critically. You need to think for yourself, and you need to help. You need to care for one another. You need to keep people in mind. You need to know that as business owners, they're just, listen, every business owner I know is just trying to kind of break even and keep their head above water and us get through this. We've all got people we're taking care of. We employ lots of people. We want those people to be able to feed their families, and we want to have our life over on the other side of this. And so we got to keep walking forward. We got to do that in a kind, caring, careful way, and just know that the divisiveness is not helpful, right? It's just not helpful. We got to find a way to work with one another, not against one another. There you go.
Dr.
That's my
Farley?
story. I'm sticking to it.
That's awesome. I think for businesses, and just for everyone in general, right? Wear a mask when you're out in public. If you can't maintain a social distance of 6 feet from other people, attempt to maintain that social distance as much as possible. Wash your hands. Okay, soap and water, just as good, if not better, than hand sanitizer. And then the third thing is the screening, for businesses. Figure out a way to screen your employees. Contact me about using our app. It's really inexpensive. And if you screen positive and you are sick or your husband has COVID, stay at home. I think that's the most important thing that we can do.
And the other thing I'd say is if your company doesn't have a program like that, you might want to reach out to Dr. Farley's organization about telemedicine too. So your employees, because good luck calling your family doc and getting in today or tomorrow. And so if you can get a medical professional through telehealth like Dr. Farley's organization, that's going to take you a lot, that's going to help that employee. That's going to, first of all, show that you care about the employee and you want to get them back to work. But it's going to give everybody a sense of confidence. Hey, they've been cleared by a doc. That so that really is just allergies, which I've got 365 days a year. The last thing I'd add is along the lines of what Beth said is, we got to realize how little control we have, and I've always had, but we've had the mystique of control. When things are going well, we think we've got a lot of control around on the world around us. We really have relatively little, and we've been reminded of that. But there are a handful of things in each of our lives that we do have control over, and just reasonably exercising that control can be a giant lever to making a difference in your business, in your life, and in the life of others, of your employees and your peers. And I think we have seen some amazing acts of kindness, generosity, and just concern for other people over the last several months. And I think we just need to all just keep whenever we get frustrated with what we're reading on Facebook, because everybody who disagrees on Facebook is wrong as far as I'm concerned, if they're, if they disagree with me. But we have to just get to the point where we can say that, okay, but at the same time, they're doing the best that they can.
Yes.
And we just got to realize, we're all, this is, there's very little any of us are really experts in, and in this, very few of us are experts. And so people are getting the advice that they get, and you're never going to convince them to change their behavior by beating them up or over-educating them even, because we know people's own experiences drive how they behave, and if their experience with you telling them to wear a mask is calling them a Nazi because they refuse to and they're trying to kill people, or calling them a Nazi because they're trying to make you wear a mask, you're not going to convince anybody.
Yeah.
So just, be kind to each other, I guess, is the thing, and realize where you can make a difference and take advantage of that. Things like this. And thank you, Fort Worth Chamber, too, for continuing to do these kind of panel discussions.
Well, we're extremely fortunate to have the expertise and your time. This is the second round. As I mentioned before, we had this with a small group of business owners before, and now we're broadcasting it to our Facebook group on Zoom, so everybody can take advantage. Mike, Dr. Farley, and Beth, thank you so much for your time. We just talked about it, but I'll say it again. Everyone, remember to wear your mask and have compassion during this time, and we will all get through this together. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey guys.
Thank
Great
you.
to participate.